You can try your first 30 days for free of the HerbRally Schoolhouse at herbrally.com/schoolhouse and just enter coupon code PODCAST at checkout. We release epic new video classes each week. We're building a growing library of diverse herbal education in video, audio, and written form, co-created with some of the most experienced and highly esteemed herbalists around. One more time, to learn more, head to herbrally.com/schoolhouse. And don't forget to use coupon code PODCAST at checkout to try your first 30 days for free. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. The content in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to cure, diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. This information has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. We are not doctors, nor do we play one on the internet. Please seek advice from a qualified healthcare professional. Okay, MC Calico, take it away.
Yeah. Smoking herbal blends. We need some Mullen and some Kush, my brethren. While listening to HerbRally Podcast again. Herbalism at its finest with Mason Hutchinson. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Guthrie, and I'm honored to be speaking to you on HerbRally's Daily Herbal Podcast. Today I want to discuss how discovering plant allies through somatic connection can help on a trauma healing journey. For those of you who don't know me, my PhD is in natural medicine with a specialization in naturopathic psychology. My master's of public health was concentrated in functional nutrition, and I'm a yoga teacher, certified aromatherapist, and the author of the Trauma Informed Herbalist. Last time, I gave you an introduction to Trauma Informed Herbalism and some of the mechanisms behind how we view trauma. We discussed the nervous system states that are described in the polyvagal theory. We touched on the immune system. We got into some mindfulness and other types of lifestyle changes, and how all of this can be affected by the plants that you choose. There are many different ways that we can choose plants. We can look at therapeutic properties. We can look at emotional healing properties. But today I want to focus on the innate wisdom of the body and how it can help us choose different herbs that might be unusual, but may be exactly what we need on this healing path. So today we'll start by talking a little bit about what is somatics work and how somatics are used, especially when it comes to plant medicine. And then we'll talk about our intuitive side, combining that with somatics to maybe lead us to some of these allies for our healing journey. So as we get started, I want to ask you a question. What is your typical answer when somebody asks you, "What do you feel?" It's pretty safe to say that in a healing setting, most people are going to begin to describe emotion. Maybe anxiousness, excitement, peaceful, frustration, all of these different descriptive words that can communicate emotional experience. But what happens if we take it even deeper? What lies beneath those emotions? What is telling you that you're having those emotions? For many people, it's that internal perception of sensation. So what if we began to shift our focus to those physical sensations? Is it possible that healing on that level could create more resilience? This is kind of the premise of somatics, working with that internal physical sensation to bring about healing, either through reconnecting with those sensations or processing what's happening with them. All of these things kind of fall under the umbrella of somatics. Somatics comes from the Greek word for body, which is soma, and almost anyone can benefit from somatics practices. But where this is really helpful in my work is that for many people who have experienced trauma, that traumatic event can sever connection to those signals offered by the body. If you've been through a lot of things that have caused you to have to ignore what your body is asking for, it can be difficult to start reconnecting to see, oh, I'm tired, my body's asking for rest. Or, oh, I need more nourishment, my body's clearly asking for different forms of support. How many times do we hear the phrase, listen to your body? And yet, when you've been through trauma, that can become very difficult. Somatic practices can help to reconnect. There are 2 forms of somatic practices that I use most frequently. The first type is embodiment practices. The second type is processing. Embodiment practices help you to feel more connected to your physical self, whereas somatic forms of processing help you to work through the different responses that are stuck in your nervous system after extreme stress or trauma. Today, I want to focus on embodiment practices that are helping you to reconnect to your physical self, and then using that alongside intuitive sense to choose different plant allies. The first step in this process is just to begin naming the sensations. The language of sensation is so vast and nuanced. You can notice things like hot, cold, dense, electric, heavy, sharp, soft. There's so many different ways that you can communicate that embodied experience. And these words are not just adjectives. They're serving as vital tools in bridging that gap between our physical experience and conscious awareness. Noticing these sensations and becoming attuned to what our body is saying is almost like learning a language that helps us to communicate better with the nervous system. And remember, the nervous system is usually the root of imbalance when somebody's been through trauma. So if we have a stronger connection through this somatic language, then we're better able to notice what's happening in the nervous system. It almost can become an early warning system for us to notice, oh wow, I'm starting to feel a little bit of this tingly sensation that tells me that I'm starting to become overwhelmed. Let me go do something to help me come back into balance. Even just noting and honoring the sensations that are occurring can be incredibly therapeutic. So just these embodiment practices alone can make a big difference. But what if your trauma has made it very difficult to feel that sensation? Sometimes a heightened sympathetic flight response can cause us to flee the sensations of our body and not be able to feel what's happening. And sometimes the dorsal vagal shutdown response, that freeze state, can cause us to be more numb. And these survival responses are great when we're facing threat, but a lot of the times they can create disconnect from our bodies when we're dealing with them on an ongoing basis. So what happens? This is a challenge. If you can't feel the somatic sensations, then how are you supposed to begin honoring them? My answer to this question: visualization. The mind can imagine where things might be in the body, and usually that ends up being the right answer. So if a physical sensation is hard to pin down, you can try imagining what it might feel like. This act of hypothetical sensing can really be a stepping stone towards cultivating that sense of physical awareness. What might the sensation feel like? What might it look like? Does it have a shape? All of these things can help to begin to create that connection, even if it's not through a felt physical sense. However you experience these somatic connections, the more frequently you work on this, the more in tune you will feel with your body. Practice this in small chunks at first. Don't feel like you have to go out and be perfectly mindfully aware of everything that's happening in your body at all moments. Just maybe set for 30 seconds and just notice what you're feeling. Maybe then you do it for 5 minutes, and if that feels good, maybe even longer. Once you've practiced this for a while, you'll start getting those nudges throughout the day. They're almost intuitive in nature. But if you will stop and give yourself a few moments to turn inward, maybe even 2 or 3 times a day, you'll find that you feel more connected to what your body needs. All right, now, how do we translate all of this into our work with plants? There are several different options, but today I really want to focus on listening to those sensations that are arising when you start working with certain plants. Maybe you have access to several herbs in your garden, and one day you can go sit with one of them. Not even necessarily drinking a tea or taking a tincture, but just sitting with that herb and just seeing what arises if you are focused on that herb. The key here is to stay open and curious, just noticing what comes up for you. If you don't have a garden, maybe you've got a park or a friend's garden or another place that you can go in nature to be around plants and see what calls to you. And while this may be a little esoteric for some, I believe that even if you don't have access to a garden or a park, you can still call on that plant spirit and think about that plant and the experiences that you've had with it in the past and still get some of these somatic responses. You could then move on to doing the same practice, but with a tincture, a tea, or a flower essence, maybe an essential oil, finding different things, trying them out, and noticing the sensations that arise. I love using this physical somatics practice because for a lot of people, especially after trauma, you may find that your emotions are very similar. So for instance, anxiety and excitement can feel very similar. But as we begin to get more in touch with those underlying physical sensations, for many people, there is a slight difference. Once they have managed to catch those differences, they're better able to translate what their body is telling them in that moment. These subtle differences translate over into our relationship with the plants and what we see might work for us, what might offer us the safety and connection on this healing journey. And it's surprising what can come of this. It would have never occurred to me to look at my basil plant and think, you're a protective ally for my healing journey. Except about 2 weeks ago, I was out picking basil and I stopped and I smelled it and I really tuned into my body. And as I was standing there just smelling this basil, there was this overwhelming sense of joy that bubbled up inside. And this was a total surprise to me, but I've run with it. I have a basil tincture that I'm now taking every morning alongside my other allies. I feel that since I've added it, I've had a lot more clarity around things. Now, some of that might be the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. Whatever it is, it's working, and I'm thrilled. Before this, I kind of grew basil as almost a vegetable. Like I grew it alongside my tomatoes and peppers to be harvested to use in the kitchen. It wasn't really something I reached for as a medicinal or emotional support herb. Another instance of this is the white oak that's in my backyard. One of my friends had come over, we were practicing some somatics together, and she was called to the white oak. And she was supposed to stay for dinner. But after being out with my tree for about 30 minutes, she came back and said, I need to go home. And I said, all right, as long as you're okay, I'll see you next time. She left, she went home, she got herself a quick dinner. And then she said that that was the best sleep that she had had in months. Something about listening to her body's urging her to go to that tree and sit with the energy of that tree caused her to get relief from some nightmares that she'd been dealing with for almost 6 months at that point. Time and again, I see somatic practices help people to reclaim that connection to their body, which then translates into them being able to build up confidence in their intuitive sense. And when you first get started, you're not likely to have these big, overwhelming reveals, right? It's going to be the small things like, do I want my sleepy time tea or my nighty-night tea? And listening to what your body's asking for. It's going to be those small little nudges that start to build. It's working out a muscle like anything else, and it will eventually bring you to a place where you can have those revelatory moments. But what happens if you start to play with this and your intuition leads you into something that probably isn't safe or might even be flat out dangerous? Maybe you're drawn toward a plant that is poisonous or It might interact with medication that you're taking, or it might just not be a good herb for your constitution. One of the best things we can do is filter that intuition through a couple of layers of common sense. So the first one being, if you're about to take a plant that you definitely know is not a good choice for you, are there other ways you can use it? Can you maybe grow it and appreciate it as a spirit ally? Maybe a flower essence is in order. Maybe there's not a need to drink it in a tea or tincture form, but maybe you can commune with it in a different way. Maybe it has a lesson that is safer for you. The same thing goes for noticing somatic sensations that are encouraging you towards something that you think this might actually not be a good decision. For instance, if I get the urge to drop everything and leave town in a moment's notice, I can't just do that and go. I have animals, I have responsibilities, I have to make sure everything's in order before I leave. Same thing with like quitting jobs and things like that. Intuition is a good guiding sense, but it has to be filtered through some of these common sense filters. So what happens if I do have a very sudden urge to do something, but my logical brain is saying, that might actually be damaging? I go back to these somatic sensations. What is the underlying root urge that's occurring? Similarly to getting creative and finding a different way to commune with a plant that maybe is poisonous or not safe for you, if there are actions that your intuition is kind of leading you towards and you think, no, that's definitely a damaging choice, get creative at what is that underlying cause and what is a healthier form of action? What is a more beneficial way to approach this situation? In every scenario, there is a way to honor what your body is asking for and what your intuition is guiding you towards without you doing something damaging to yourself. And the world of somatics does not end here. You can take different herbs or smell different essential oils to help to bring certain somatic sensations to the surface. You can use the plants during somatic processing techniques to help reduce any feelings of overwhelm that may come up. And what we described today, where you're turning inward while you're working with the plants to notice the somatic sensations that are coming up, to notice what your body is calling out for to be a plant ally, those can be wonderful plants in situations where you begin to feel overwhelmed or you feel like you need to have that connection. Always remember that trauma thrives in fear and isolation. Anytime we can bring ourselves back to a place of curiosity and connection, we're combating that trauma. And these plant allies that you are discovering through these somatic techniques can help to bring that consistent feeling of safety and connection. And finally, if this kind of thing is really interesting to you, you can go to traumainformedherbalist.com to check out more of the work I'm doing in this field. Thank you for listening to HerbRally's Daily Herbal Podcast, and I'll catch you again soon.
And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks so much for listening to the HerbRally Podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us here at HerbRally, we now have a text message community, believe it or not. Basically, it's just updates from us. We send about 1 to 7 texts per week, notifying you about new events, videos, courses, podcasts. You get the idea. It's pretty much like our email newsletter, just in text form. So if you'd like to receive text messages from HerbRally, just text JOIN, that's JOIN, to the number 541-256-2895. Again, that's JOIN to number 541-256-2895. And to stop receiving texts, that's easy too. Just text STOP to the same number. It'll opt you out immediately. Okay, thanks again for listening. Have a great rest of your day.